So Arizona football continues to be a bit of a marvel on the recruiting trail from the standpoint that you couldn't have been that much worse in 2021 from a record standpoint. They celebrated their lone win, a 10-3 barn burner against Cal, like it was the Super Bowl down there. A friend of mine who went to U of A was in Tucson for the game. He said there were massive parties and everyone was going nuts, and it was an exciting time because he had snapped what was, I believe, a 20-game losing streak as a program. And so now they have overtaken Colorado for the most verbal commitments in the class of 2023. Will that last a year from now? Time will tell, but it's not nothing that at this point Arizona's gotten 14 verbal commits. And are all 14 going to stay committed to the Wildcats long term? Maybe, maybe not, but you got to imagine at least 11 of them will, and it'll probably be 12 or 13. And a couple of them that have committed as of late, Arian, Parish, and Carter Stoutmire, both guys on the defensive side on the ball. So let's start with Parish. What could Arizona and new defensive coordinator Johnny Nansen be getting there?
Oh, man, this is an instinctive, aggressive defensive back, a guy who could play nickel, probably play outside if you need be there as well, coming out of the state of Texas, a guy who, again, just really attacks the football at a high level, takes chances. If you're a fan of the NFL, think of a Janoris Jenkins kind of player who, yeah, you might get beat every now and then, but he's going to be in the mix for turnovers and getting his hands on the football, which is really becoming what it's about at the end of the day. You know, yardage and first downs just don't mean as much as they used to from a defensive perspective. It's about minimizing points and turning the football over. And I think this is the type of player that helps you do that with that aggressive style. And he runs well as well from what we can tell on tape. Obviously plays, a high level of competition. And if there's a state that you want to dip into more if you're Arizona, you're always going to recruit California really well. The in-state crop is good, even though there's zero commits from Arizona at this point. You want to go east. You want to go towards Texas and start to become more of a player for some of those prospects. And I think, they've been hosting a lot of Texans on campus, and they started to get a few to make some decisions towards U of A. So I really like this get. Really impressive relative to maybe what you would think for a kid who's committing to Arizona in the secondary right now, not one who maybe settles for U of A, instead like really just latched on to the official visit and really liked what he saw out in Tucson.
Yeah, and it's not a small list of teams that have offered him and were after this verbal commitment. Among them, I mean, there are other programs who I'd say Arizona's, kind of on par, maybe above in terms of, their status as a program, or kind of their pedigree is the word that I was searching for there. But USC was in the mix here. Wisconsin was in the mix here. Houston was in the mix. I mean, those are that's not nobody that you're beating out for these sorts of recruits. And speaking of the secondary and recruiting that side of the ball, they got another DB from Texas, and they must really like the defensive backs coming out of the Lone Star State here. And, neither one are huge guys, both Arian Parish and Carter Stoutmire. The next guy we're going to talk about here listed about 5'11", so definitely projecting kind of as that free safety mold, kind of ball hawking, roaming on the back end, and be those sorts of players in your secondary that you need. But again, he had Mississippi State after him. That's an SEC school. You had Penn State after him. That's a big time brand. And ultimately right now he's on Arizona. So is this kind of, you see those two battling it out for playing time going forward if they both stay committed to Arizona? Or do you think that, it's a situation where they're both going to be able to see the field regularly?
Yeah, I think they kind of complement one another. I think physically they're built similarly, but I think their games are contrasts. We talked about Parish as this kind of aggressive Jackrabbit style corner who's really going to test you. And I think Stoutmire is a little bit more, passive, a little smarter, a roaming type of prospect who probably projects more of the nickel or a safety at the next level. Both of them run really well. So you could see it almost interchangeably from a positional perspective, but from a stylistic perspective, I think Stoutmire is a little bit more angular, a guy who's more focused on cutting guys off as opposed to blowing them up and trying to create a turnover. So you need a little bit of each of those things when you're talking about building a secondary. I think Stoutmire, he's got some NFL bloodlines. He looks like a good communicator, a guy who's going to stay within his responsibility, but still can absolutely turn and find the football and make a play on it. I just really like kind of the responsibility that he shows on tape, a guy who can execute zone and man turns really, really well, and again, stay in line in the hip pocket of his assignment as opposed to drifting off course a little bit. So there's a yin and yang to these two guys in terms of their style. Both play great competition in the state of Texas, as we've talked about. Parish from Katy and Stoutmire from Plano in the Dallas area. So, yeah, these are great prospects. Like you said, the offer lists speak for themselves, and you start to look at this Arizona class, which was a top 25 class last year, and you start to say, man, can they maybe pull this thing off again? I'm not sure that they have the elite targets in that range to do so, but the volume is certainly getting there for U of A. I'm not sure how many programs have more verbal commitments. I think Notre Dame does off the top of my head, and maybe Texas Tech as well. But there's not a lot that I can think of off the top of my head that have more than 14 on board. Northwestern's close to that number as well. So it's a small group of programs that are really taking advantage of spring visits and now these June official visits, which are, a little bit contradictory to what we've seen on the recruiting trail. Usually it gets picked up a little bit more towards the season itself, and then certainly in the winter months. But a lot of these programs that aren't your marquee blue blood schools are taking advantage, outside of Notre Dame, obviously. The others, are taking advantage of the new calendar and trying to get big time targets on campus earlier than they normally would.
Yeah, and of the 14 verbal commits Arizona's got right now in the class of 2023, which at the moment sits at 32nd nationally, which is a pretty good place to be at this point in the cycle. The headline recruit at the moment is Braden Dorman, 4-star quarterback out of Colorado Springs. But Stoutmire and Parish, these two guys we're talking about, are two of the 5 highest rated recruits that they've got committed for next year's class right now, and all stuff that we will continue to follow for Arizona and the rest of the conference here on Locked On Pac-12 with John Garcia Jr., the director of recruiting for Sports Illustrated. Appreciate the insight and analysis as always, John.
Always a pleasure, Spencer. Take care, boss.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. I will see you next time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.